I'm here today with Erich Schiffmann. He's the author of one of the great books on yoga, Yoga, the Spirit and Practice of Moving into Stillness. Thanks so much for being with us.
There's books about this, and there's discussions about this, and there's arguments about this, but it's sort of I think what it comes down to is the simple, obvious fact that you're conscious, I'm conscious, I'm conscious presence. I don't know how I got conscious. I didn't make myself conscious. It's sort of just the predicament I find myself in. It's the predicament everyone finds themselves in. I don't have to do anything to stay present or stay conscious. It's just sort of the effortless fact. So if I've got my computer, and before the internet came in, I had a computer. I had some crummy little computer. And I remember I bought it because they advertised that you could move a paragraph from here in a document to here. And it's so for writing, it would be time saving. And so I moved the paragraph, and 5 minutes later, it was there. But the better the equipment got, it was you can start doing things fast. So computers were awesome. And on your computer, you've got the hard drive. And the hard drive is sort of your data storage. And if you've got a small hard drive, it can hold this much information. If you get a bigger hard drive, it holds more information. If you max out, then you've got to start getting external hard drives. And it's sort of we've got lifetimes of experiences in our personal mind hard drive, to use the computer analogy. And I can diddle with the info on my computer. But the only information I've got is what's on my personal mind hard drive. But as soon as the internet came in, all I had to do was plug in and connect. And if I was a little baby computer with a small hard drive, I could still get online. If I was a big computer, connect, still get online. And in both instances, you're getting online with the same onlineness. And it's sort of the way I talk about yoga now is it's small mind, and the word yoga means yoke, which means to join. And what they were talking about is small mind joining with big mind, with the supreme consciousness, in the same way that you would use your computer to get online. And when you get online, you're still wherever you are, you're still in the local environment, and yet suddenly you've got access to whatever's on the internet anywhere, and you can be online with other people who are also online. Meditation is about using your mind to get online. Yoga is about getting online so that instead of navigating your life with your own personal mind hard drive with necessarily limited amount of data, lifetimes of experience, instead of doing that, getting online, and then being wherever you happen to be, local environment, but being where you find yourself being with online knowing. So it's like the deal is to be online as you be wherever you be. And then the insight is that, wow, it's not small mind joining with big mind, even though that's what it seems like initially. It's the fact that, wow, big mind is my mind. The online mind that seems like you're joining with, the supreme consciousness, the totality, is your mind. Like is your mind, is my mind, is the only mind. And it's like, whoa. I mean, that's what it is as far as I can tell.
And so the idea of presence in that scheme, we have these computers with, our own hard drives, this internet that is consciousness. How does the idea of presence fit into that picture?
Consciousness is what's being present.
So that is, like, presence is consciousness.
Exactly.
Is this kind of big mind, internet.
Yes, world.
Thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. One of the enemies many of us have is time. And Emerson, for example, talks about something interesting that happens in the present moment with time. He uses this analogy of a rose and how the rose just is in total perfection. When the rose is just a little bud, it's perfect. When it's fully formed, it's perfect. It's not thinking about, past, future. And he talks about this idea that when we live like the rose and when we have this state of presence or drop into this consciousness of presence, time almost disappears. He calls it, we go above time, he says.
Yeah. It's hard to get words on to where it reflects it accurately, but it is that. I mean, it's that most of us time is linear, but the actual experience is like the actual, you know what I mean?
There's
like
no word.
It's the isness only.
Uh-huh.
And time is sort of like a past and a future, which isn't the is. So time is basically talking about something which isn't, but that we believe in, and therefore we don't give our attention to the now. And it's sort of like, instead of being linear, like the now is sort of like this little gap. And it's something like when you slide into the now, instead of it just being this fleeting, suddenly it's like, it's like this.
One way I've heard it described is it's razor thin, but infinitely deep.
And when you slide into it, it's like suddenly it's opens up and,
Yeah.
and it's everywhere.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like not only deep, but it's
Wide.
and present and
Yeah.
yes. And has been the only thing going on the whole time, actually.
So there are no practices, I think you said at one point, for getting in this present space.
Nothing essential.
But there are certainly, but you do teach yoga.
Yes.
And then I take yoga and teach yoga as
Right.
well. And so is that a tool for getting into this place? I mean, what's the role of yoga or meditation or some of these things that we would call practices, I guess?
Yeah, okay. Well, like the practices would be, basically what I'm doing is practicing getting online. The more time I'm online, but that's a funny way to say it too. But the more, the more online, the more I realize that the online state is sort of ever present, then it's sort of like the practices are getting out of the habit of doing something else. The way I talk about it often is like you're learning to get into a place where you're not thinking quite so much. And when you're not thinking quite so much, suddenly the download is right there. Like you find yourself knowing whatever you need to know without dredging up. Like Krishnamurti used to talk about thinking as like the regurgitation of the past. So like instead of thinking, regurgitating the past to come up with answers about knowing what to do or not do. Stop thinking to the best of your ability. You'll still be conscious. In other words, consciousness and thinking are not equivalent. Put your thinking on hold. You'll still be conscious. And at that point, it's sort of like the window of your mind is receptive to the download, and you find yourself knowing what to do. And so, which is helpful. I mean, like you need to know what to do. I mean, you're living a life and you got concerns and problems and stuff you got to figure out. And you can either try to figure them out the old way, or you can start figuring out a better way. And the better way seems to be, instead of using your thinking, use your thinking to remind yourself to listen. So the practice is do stuff that helps you tune in, silent-minded, use the usual spiritual stuff like quiet-minded. And that's been the prescription, because when you quiet-mind it, it's not like you're left with nothing at that point. So like when I first started hearing about the quiet mind, I was talking with a friend and he said, why would you want to get into the thought-free, quiet mind? Like it sounds idiotic, it sounds moronic, it sounds like how does that answer your questions? But when you do it, it's like, because consciousness is being conscious as you, then when you silent mind it, the download flows in and you find yourself being a little smarter than you were a moment ago. So like the quiet mind, any practices that help you think less, essentially, and tune in, make you receptive to insight. And the insight will be relevant or, to whatever your predicament is. So I'm thinking, cool. So that's the practice. Or the practices are about letting go of what you think you know. It's that thing like the smarter you get, the more you realize how little you know. And so don't rely so much on the little you know. But if that was the total story, it would be a bummer. Don't rely so much on the little you know. Instead, be smart enough to get online again, listen again, open to the Supreme again. Mm-hmm. And if you're lucky, but it happens, then the knowing that you need flows in. If you're going down the road, whenever you have a decision, whenever you have a choice, it's like you're going down the road, suddenly there's a fork. If you were clear at that moment, you wouldn't really be at a choice moment, at a decision moment. But when you are at a real fork in the road in your life, it's an indication that you need a bigger perspective than the one you've got. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, the obvious thing to do would be obvious. And so, instead of being bummed out at that point that, wow, I've hit the limits of my knowing, I don't know what to do, realize that whenever you're making a decision, whenever you're faced with a choice moment, realize that you need the bigger perspective, and then don't make up your own mind. Put what you think on hold for the moment and just turn your mind however works to think of it. Just turn your mind to big mind, get online, talk to Jesus, anything like that, and ask, like, what should I do in this moment? Be smart enough to know that you don't know.
Right.
And instead of that being a bummer, let it behoove you, or let it inspire you to get online. So instead of making your decisions based on your necessarily limited amount of info on your personal mind hard drive, instead of going there, because if the answer was there, you would know what to do at this moment. Mm-hmm. Instead of going into your mind about it, realize you don't know. Don't make up your own mind about it, and instead ask for guidance. Pause, ask, listen. At that point, you'll then hear, and hear in the sense of you'll feel inspired to do one thing rather than another. And at that point, it becomes a matter of trusting what you find yourself knowing. And the thing is, like, often the guidance that you hear is not going to make sense to pea-brain. Like to ground level perspective, the aerial view is not always going to make sense. But if it makes sense that it may not make sense, then you suddenly find yourself willing to trust into it, especially in those moments where you really need guidance and where it's clear that whatever you're doing is not working.
And so, is there a way to start small with this process?
And so the trick is start with easy things.
Yeah, you don't want to start with marriages or jobs. Those are the big things, right?
Start with easy things, because most of life is pretty easy anyway. Most, like this morning it was, should I have Wheaties or cornflakes? Should I put on this shirt or the other shirt? Should I put on these pants or the other pants? And the tendency is to think, I don't need to ask big mind which shirt to wear. I don't want to bug big mind with, I can get dressed by myself. But it's sort of like whenever you have a decision, getting dressed, what to eat for breakfast, what time to leave. From now on, whenever you notice you're making a decision, don't make up your own mind, but and my experience is that if you practice it on the easy things and you are being online, then you are being congruent with the way things work, and you'll find yourself not getting slammed quite so much. And so especially if is a big issue that you're concerned about, should I quit the job? Should I marry this person or this person? When you have a vested interest in what the answer is, the tendency is to tighten up and not listen very well because you want it to go a certain way. But if you have a vested interest in the way it goes, then you're gonna be putting this torque on your listening ability. And the more you do that, and you can do that.
Well, and as I see you doing that, the more you're torquing, the more your physical body is actually torquing too.
Exactly,
right?
yeah,
Closing down,
right.
creating tension.
Exactly. And you're free to do that. And you're equally free to not do that anymore. and to the best of your ability, just be online all the time. And then give expression to what you find yourself knowing. And it won't feel super duper insights all the time. It'll just mostly feel
Yeah.
surfing through life.